It is that time of year again where we look to the future of MMOs. We're going to look at the MMOs that are most exciting coming out in 2025 and beyond. Which ones will be good, bad, jank? Let's find out. The first MMO I want to talk about is Dune Awakening. This MMO is going to be set on the sands of Arrakis, and I think it's going to be one of the biggest MMOs of 2025, to be honest with you. It's currently scheduled for early 2025, which I'm kind of anticipating to be around about March, April or May. That is if there are no delays. The game is basically a third-person action combat but also shooter game, and for me it might be one of the first MMOs that truly blends survival gaming with the MMO element as well. And I think it's going to capture a large part of that audience. If you're into shooter games, then you might be interested in Dune Awakening. If you're interested in survival games, you might be interested in Dune Awakening. And if you are indeed interested in MMOs, then there's going to be a large multiplayer component to this game. At the start of the game, I think you're going to like crash land, have to build your way up through the Hagar Basin, which is mostly going to be a PvE focused survival crafting experience that's going to take around about 60 hours. And players will basically pick effectively like a realm, and then each realm will have different areas, and those areas will have different layers. So the Hagar Basin I think is going to have around about 40 people. But eventually, as you level up and you get all the good stuff, you'll move to the more hardcore area, the deep desert, which is going to be PvP enabled. And it's also where you're going to farm the best resources, you're going to find the best spice and all that kind of stuff. The deep desert is going to be hundreds of players though per layer. Dune Awakening is also releasing on the Unreal Engine, and visually I really like it. Some people are getting a little bit fatigued of just seeing desert all the time, but for me it's beautiful desert. I think this is going to be very exciting, one you should definitely pay attention to. For me, my major problem with it is that I'm not really an always on PvP kind of guy, but if I'm honest, everything we've seen about Dune kind of winning me over a little bit. So we'll likely be giving it a try both on YouTube and on Twitch. The next MMO though is definitely one I'm keeping a very close eye on, and that is Chrono Odyssey. Now, Chrono Odyssey is being made by a Korean developer, NPixel, technically a subsidiary of that company called Chrono Studios, I believe, but ignore that, that's not that relevant. What is relevant is that it is an action combat MMO potentially releasing in 2025. It is currently scheduled for the end of 2025 with a closed beta at some point early 2025, and then hopefully an open beta maybe around about summer, I think. Maybe I've made that up. But it's an action combat game. It has a unique chrono mechanism, which we're not 100% sure how that will work, but it kind of shows like rewinding time. The combat looks sensational. It's built on the Unreal Engine. There's going to be different classes, which I think probably has the Holy Trinity, although I'm not 100% sure about that. There seems to be this trend at the minute where action combat MMOs are moving away from the idea of being PvP and moving perhaps to more PvE single player story based gaming, and Chrono Odyssey is following that trend. However, there is going to be PvP, we're just not sure in what format. For me, when it comes to the MMO genre, apart from Dune, Chrono is the one that I think might get a lot of people excited. Will they make action combat work? Will it feel good? Will it release in 2025? I hope so, because it looks sensational and I'm very excited. Now, as soon as you heard me say that Chrono Odyssey was being made by a Korean developer, you probably thought that this game will be pay to win. Well, currently in the financials that Kakao published to the investors and stuff like that, they are saying they're going to try and not be pay to win. They're going to try and follow the kind of more standard Western audience model of being buy to play and then selling DLCs. That could be exciting. However, the proof will be in the pudding. Let's see when it actually releases what kind of business model we get. However, if it's mostly PvE, I kind of don't mind pay to win as much as say something that would have been like a full PvP game. Yes, I'm talking about Youth on Liberty. I mean, you can assume that almost all of these games might have an element of pay to win, but if it's Korean, you can kind of like, you know, it's a bit more likely. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about Chrono Odyssey or Archeage Chronicles here because, to be honest, I'll do that in like individual videos, but I'm definitely keeping an eye on that one. I'm also keeping an eye on Archeage Chronicles, which is the next game we're going to talk about. It's another action combat MMO that's kind of got single player focus with story elements. One key thing here with Archeage Chronicles is that this is not a direct sequel to Archeage 1. They renamed it from Archeage 2 to Archeage Chronicles for this very reason. It is a fundamentally completely different game. It's not tab target, it's actually action combat, and it's not going to have the same kind of PvP mechanics. So if you're wanting that, you're not getting that, don't be disappointed. Well, you can be disappointed, but don't expect that because that's just unrealistic, right? However, it's an action combat MMO currently scheduled for release in summer 2026, but all of the visuals that they've shown look fantastic. Again, it is being made on Unreal Engine 5. Visually looks good, beautiful looking game. Let's hope they nail the combat. Let's hope it's a good MMO. Let's hope it's not pay to win. The next MMO I'm going to talk about is Aion 2. Now, we were just talking about Archeage 2 and not expecting it to be Archeage 1. I would possibly assume that that might be the case for Aion 2. However, I don't really know. Aion 2, though, has very few details about it right now, apart from in a recent financial call, NCSoft, who are going to be making the game, said they're going to start sharing details in early 2025 for a hopeful release at the end of 2025. Now, Aion 1 was relatively well received, so hopefully Aion 2 will be good as well. The very few visuals that we've seen look very interesting. The combat looks kind of like action-ish, maybe. And I think they've also said it's going to focus a little bit on PvE. The main problem, or at least there's two main problems, is that they did say it's going to follow the Throne Liberty business model, which some of you might be okay with, but some of you might not. For me, it's PvE. I wouldn't mind the Throne Liberty business model in a PvE game. Kind of sort of seems like it would make a bit more sense if you're going to be pay to win. Then that's not a massively unfair way of doing it. But perhaps the bigger problem is actually that it is also being made on mobile. It's mobile and PC, but it is very possible that the PC version will be hindered by having to also work on mobile, or at least the controls might be jank. In Tarisland, for example, it kind of worked, but there were some things where you could tell it was obviously designed for mobile and it didn't really translate very well to PC. Hopefully that's not the case and they actually nail it. Tarisland was kind of enjoyable on PC. Maybe Aion 2 can be enjoyable on PC as well, and mobile. Or it could just be mobile trash, so, you know, I don't know. Jury's out, we'll have to wait and see. The next game we're going to talk about is Stars Reach. Now, Stars Reach is basically a futuristic sci-fi game, kind of similar to Star Wars Galaxies, and that makes sense because the developers mostly are from Star Wars Galaxies, and Star Wars Galaxies is basically the inspiration for this game. They did a first sort of like video with it, and the graphics look pretty bad, and they very quickly listened to the community and listened to the feedback and did another video where the graphics were much improved. They appear to be progressing very quickly with this, and it's going to be a very interesting kind of like sandbox game. There's terraforming, there's going to be like deep economy, deep resources, changing like the flow of rivers and all this kind of stuff. It potentially is very exciting, especially if you played Star Wars Galaxies, which I didn't, and people always go on about how great of a game it was, but I never played it, so I don't know, and maybe I'll get the chance to play Stars Reach and maybe it'll be good or better, hopefully. No idea what the release schedule for that is going to be, but as I said, they're working on it, and the speed that they're working on it seems quite quick, so hopefully we'll get something playable for everybody, maybe in 2025, maybe 2026. The next MMO I'm going to talk about, though, is going to be Bellatores. Now, very few people know about this MMO for some very good reasons. Mainly, not many details are known about it, but it is going to be a tab target PvP focused MMO. It is being made by a Korean developer though, and they're kind of going with this theme of, it being similar to Game of Thrones. There's going to be these families which are going to act as factions. There's going to be nodes that you want to take over. It's always on PvP. There's going to be elections. There's going to be big bosses that you're all going to want to go and kill. For a lot of people, this will tick some of the right boxes in that old school MMO feeling, and I'm keeping an eye on it as well. The very limited footage that they've shown does look good, so I'm tentatively excited. But details on this game, I mean, it could come at any point. It could honestly release in the next 2 months or the next 20 years. I have no idea. In the next section, I'm going to talk about some smaller MMOs. They could be jank, they could be scuffed, they might never release, they might not have a Western release. Who knows? Let's talk about them. But I'll try and do that a little bit quickly, okay? And then we'll talk about some major MMOs, not even quadruple stars, like 5-star MMOs. It's going to be insane. Okay, I'm getting a little bit too excited. Let's talk about these sort of smaller games first. And the first MMO I want to talk about, which is going to anger literally dozens of people, and that's a joke, is going to be Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Now, this game is actually hitting early access this month, December 2024. It is basically an old school tab target MMO, kind of like EverQuest, being made by people who enjoyed EverQuest. Could be a game you're interested in. For me, I think it's probably going to be like a little bit niche and isn't overly exciting for my personal taste, but if you're interested in it, well then the early access is this month. The next game I'll talk about is Perfect New World. This is a Chinese game that looked like it was going to be releasing kind of soon, but appears to have fallen completely off the face of the earth. I'm not even sure it's going to get a release at this point. Seemed like it was sort of entering development hell. However, it has had many different betas, and I'm kind of surprised they've not just released it at this point. But, you know, it's hard to tell what's going on with it. It's an action combat MMO. It looks kind of fun. I never actually played the beta, but could be interesting. There's another MMO called Mortal Exodus, which is basically the people who made Mortal Online 2, but instead of doing a fantasy game, they're doing a sci-fi game, which could be very interesting indeed, but details on this one are a little bit scarce. But if you liked Mortal Online and you always wished, instead of it being on the ground, you could be in the space above, then maybe Mortal Exodus will be for you. There's an MMO apparently scheduled for Q1 called Epitome, although I'm pretty confident it's just an alpha, which is promising AI-driven NPCs and stuff like that, so my hopes are very, very low. The screenshots on that kind of look a little bit like Quinfall, but... And then there's Quinfall itself. We had the beta, it was a little bit jank, but they keep working on it, they keep improving on it. If they can get the servers to work on Quinfall, it would be a game that I would play, but not necessarily devote my entire life to. I kind of enjoyed the combat when it worked, but, you know, it barely worked. Action combat, indie developer, a little bit tricky to actually make work. The next MMO is Monsters and Memories. It's an upcoming subscription-based MMO, I believe, inspired by classic MMOs like EverQuest. It's going to have group play, deliberate progression, player-driven economy, etc. It's developed by an indie developer, very focused on the nostalgic old MMOs. Personally think it'll be rather niche, but maybe it's your type of niche. There's another MMO called World of Jade Dynasty. That's a Chinese game which I think is having a beta this year in China. No idea if it will get released over here in the West, but a lot of people are excited about the action combat in that game. And then I'll very quickly just talk about a couple of games that I don't think are MMOs. The first of which is going to be Soulframe. Soulframe Prologue is apparently releasing this year, although there's a dev video in a couple of days, so we'll probably find out the exact date. I personally wouldn't call it an MMO. It is basically a co-op Souls-like game, at least for now. Maybe they'll eventually add some more MMO features, but that's not there yet. And the other game I want to talk about in this category is actually a huge game, but I'm not sure it's an MMO, and that is Light No Fire. Light No Fire is basically from the people who made No Man's Sky, and to me, it looks like a kind of like co-op survival game. But how many people do you have to be before you go from co-op to MMO? I'm not really sure. It's one I'm keeping an eye out on, but I'm not really optimistic that this is an MMO. We'll see. It looks good though, for sure. It definitely looks good. And then let's move away from games that are either jank, bad, not MMOs, or maybe potentially an MMO, we just don't realize it, and that was Light No Fire. Let's move to games that are MMOs being made by big teams, competent teams with good IPs. And the first one we're going to start with is Guild Wars 3, because I think that fits all of those definitions. Guild Wars 3 is officially in the works. NCSoft, who own ArenaNet, confirmed that they've basically given the go-ahead for work to begin on that project. However, it's probably in the early stages yet, maybe even pre-production at this point. Guild Wars 2 is a highly successful PvX MMO, good PvP, good PvE. I know Guild Wars 3 would be very exciting for a lot of people. A lot of people would check that out. Obviously, when it comes to timelines, we don't know anything about it. It's very early. If I was going to predict anything, it's like 5-6 years away. If not, maybe less, because I guess they are a very competent team. I think it's going to be made in Unreal Engine, by the way. But yeah, don't quote me on that. And then the next MMO is kind of similar, although not really a sequel. And that is the MMO currently being made by ZeniMax Online Studios. That is not the current MMO, Elder Scrolls Online. So yes, they make Elder Scrolls Online, and yes, they're still making content for that, but we know now that they are working on a future MMO. The details of which are perhaps the most scarce of any of these games. Like, we literally know nothing about this, apart from the fact that at one point they did a job listing for a new IP. Some people have speculated that new IP might have been Starfield. They just hadn't announced Starfield at this point, but we don't know the IP. We don't even really know what engine it's on. Some of the postings kind of imply it's an Unreal Engine game, and then some of the postings say they're going to be making their own engine. What I would say though is that Elder Scrolls Online is a pretty decent PvX MMO. The stories in that game are very well received, and the only thing that people often go on about is the combat. But you would think after like 10 years of making Elder Scrolls Online, maybe they can nail the combat in the future MMO. Maybe it's going to be very, very interesting. It's the kind of MMO that they've been working on for a few years, probably in actual development at this stage, and the details, I suspect Microsoft, who own them, will literally just drop it at one point and be like, it's coming out next year. with a beta here. I don't think it's the kind of game where we're going to see like open development or anything like that. Well, we know we're not. Very, very much one to pay attention to, even if right now you can't really pay that much attention to it because there's not that much info, but still exciting. And then let's just jump straight to Riot MMO. Yes, the Riot MMO is being worked on. Yes, they had to rework the project. So last year it was going to be made by GhostPro, then GhostPro left and they've basically changed the entire game. Mark Merrill, though, who's like one of the heads of Riot, said at the recent World that yes, we're still making an MMO. Yes, we've had to restart it. We'll let you know it's in early production. It's just one of those games where a lot of people are excited. They've yet to quite find the right thing for what they're trying to make, but they're progressing. They're still trying. It'll be out in a few years. It is Riot, though. They're a big team with a lot of budget. This MMO could be one of the fastest being made from like the now point. Obviously, technically, you could argue that it's been being made for like years and years, but I think they'll be pretty quick at producing it once they are happy with what they are producing. It's the Riot MMO, but I'm talking about the one set in the League of Legends universe. Apparently, they're going to be making like a shooter MMO in the Valorant universe. Not sure what's going on with that one. It's exciting nonetheless. Whatever Riot do is exciting just because they've got such a pedigree at the minute of producing pretty competent games. Even if, you know, sometimes League of Legends can be toxic as balls. However, let's jump back to another sequel, actually. Let's jump now to EverQuest 3. EverQuest 3 has been always to be rumored in the works for years and years, but we've had official confirmation that they have started pre-production on EverQuest 3. The only details right now is that it might not even be called EverQuest 3. They might change the name to kind of move away from it being like a sequel, and I would expect it to be a very traditional MMO with nothing crazy in it. I'm guessing they're not going to like radically change the game or the format of the game, considering it, you know, it's one of the standout kind of like, we have this version of what MMOs should be, but we'll see. It's in pre-production, could be years away, but could be very exciting for the people who like EverQuest. The next MMO I do want to talk about, though, is one that I would be very interested in, because who's making it? It's going to be the MMO being made by Amazon Games, that is Lord of the Rings. Now, this is not the Lord of the Rings that was being made by Amazon and Tencent. That game got cancelled. No, this is the Lord of the Rings that is basically being made by the exact same people who made New World. Now, for some of you, that will be an instant turn off, but New World has progressed very nicely in the last 3 years. And no, it's absolutely not perfect, but they have made some positive changes. And I believe that if given enough time, given enough resource, given enough budget, that same studio could produce a very competent, a very good Lord of the Rings MMO. However, I sort of suspect that it's going to be many years away. I would not be overly optimistic about the speediness of this game. Although I think actually New World was maybe only like 4 years, you know? And a lot of people will say it shows, so let's hope they take a little bit longer with this one. And then the next MMO I want to talk about is another kind of like enigma. It's actually one being co-made, or at least in conjunction with Sony and NCSoft, and it's going to be based on the Horizon Zero Dawn games. Now, I've never played that game, but it does have a competent IP, and it's NCSoft who've made MMOs before. It's one of those, it's out of left field, probably going to take several years, but could be one you might want to pay attention to as well. And then the next big MMO that is also being worked on is just ominously a Warhammer MMO. Now, we're not 100% sure which Warhammer it's going to be. It is being made by Jackalyptic Games, which are a studio I think based out of Austin, and they've worked previously on games like City of Heroes, Neverwinter and Star Trek Online. Well, maybe not that studio, but the people who worked at that studio have worked on those games. And we're not really sure what brand of Warhammer it's going to be. Is it 40k? Is it fantasy? Is it Age of Sigmar? Well, we don't know. But the Warhammer universes are generally well liked, and Warhammer Age of Reckoning was quite well received as well. A future Warhammer game could be very, very interesting indeed. If they do an actually competent Warhammer 40k MMO, which by the way is absolutely not the best Warhammer, but whatever, let's just not argue about that here. But if they do a Warhammer 40k MMO that's good, then that could be really, really interesting, especially seeing the success of games like Space Marine. For my take, the future of my channel is probably going to be like Chrono Odyssey, Archeage Chronicles. They fit my vibe, with a little bit of Dune sprinkled in, because that's, you know, coming up relatively soon. Dune soon. It all just works together. But the rest of these MMOs, if we get details and one of them starts taking my fancy, then yeah, I might play it here, do some YouTube videos, do some Twitch content. Let me know which games take your fancy the most. Come talk to me on Twitch. Become a Patreon if you want to. Have a beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.